The emergency room at San Diego General Hospital buzzed with its usual chaos. Nurses rushed between beds, doctors shouted orders over the constant beeping of machines, and ambulance sirens wailed outside the glass doors. Dr. Sarah Chun had seen it all in her 10 years as an emergency physician, but nothing could have prepared her for what walked through those doors on that Tuesday evening in October. Marcus Rodriguez pushed open the hospital entrance with his shoulder, his right arm cradled against his chest. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage wrapped around his forearm, and his face was pale beneath his dark skin. He moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to pain, each step measured and deliberate. The automatic doors whooshed shut behind him, cutting off the sound of traffic from the busy street outside. Sarah looked up from her computer screen, where she had been reviewing lab results. Something about the way this man carried himself caught her attention immediately. Despite his obvious injury, he stood straight, his eyes scanning the room with the sharp awareness of someone trained to assess threats. His clothes were civilian, a simple black t-shirt and jeans, but his bearing was unmistakably military. "Can I help you?" asked Jenny, the triage nurse, approaching Marcus with a clipboard in hand. Marcus nodded toward his injured arm. "Cut myself pretty bad at work. Figured I should get it looked at." His voice was steady, almost casual, as if discussing the weather rather than a wound that clearly needed immediate attention. Jenny's experienced eyes took in the extent of the bleeding and the makeshift bandage. "Okay, Han, let's get you checked in. Name: Marcus Rodriguez. Date of birth: March 15th, 1985. Sarah found herself listening to the exchange while pretending to focus on her computer. There was something about his calm demeanor that struck her as unusual. Most people came into the ER with cuts like his in various states of panic or distress. This man seemed almost detached. "Insurance?" Jenny continued with her routine questions. "Bakubaraja." That explained the military bearing, Sarah thought. She had treated many veterans over the years, and they often carried themselves with that same control composure, even when injured. "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Rodriguez?" Jenny asked, noting the information on her clipboard. Marcus hesitated for just a moment. "Construction." Sarah's trained ear caught the slight pause. As someone who had worked in emergency medicine for a decade, she had developed a sixth sense for when patients weren't telling the complete truth. Not necessarily lying, but holding something back. "All right, Mr. Rodriguez, have a seat, and we'll get you back as soon as possible," Jenny said, handing him a hospital bracelet. "Dr. Chin will take good care of you." Marcus found an empty chair in the corner of the waiting room, positioning himself so he could see both the entrance and the hallway leading to the treatment areas. Old habits, Sarah mused, watching him from the nurse's station. She had seen this behavior before in combat veterans. The constant situational awareness, the need to control their environment. 20 minutes later, Sarah called his name. Marcus stood immediately, following her down the hall to examination room 3. The small space contained the usual equipment: an examination table covered with white paper, a rolling stool, cabinets filled with medical supplies, and the antiseptic smell that permeated every corner of the hospital. "Have a seat on the table," Sarah said, washing her hands at the small sink. "Let's take a look at what we're dealing with." Marcus sat on the edge of the examination table, extending his injured arm. Sarah carefully began unwrapping the makeshift bandage, noting that it had been applied with considerable skill. The wrapping technique was precise, maintaining proper pressure to control bleeding while not cutting off circulation. "You did a good job with this bandage," she commented. "Where did you learn first aid?" "Picked it up here and there," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall behind her. As Sarah removed the last layer of gauze, she sucked in a quiet breath. The wound was indeed deep, a clean laceration about 4 inches long running along his forearm. But it wasn't the cut that caught her attention. Surrounding the fresh injury were multiple scars, some old and faded, others more recent. Her trained eye cataloged them automatically. What appeared to be a bullet wound near his shoulder, several small round scars that could be shrapnel marks, and a long, thin line across his bicep that looked surgical in nature. "This is going to need stitches," she said, keeping her voice professional. How did this happen? Piece of metal at the job site. Slipped and caught my arm on it. Sarah nodded, but her mind was working. The edges of the wound were too clean, too straight for an accidental cut on construction metal. This looked more like a knife wound, though she kept this observation to herself. I'm going to clean this thoroughly and then stitch it up, she explained, pulling on latex gloves. I'll give you a local anesthetic first, so you shouldn't feel much. That's fine, Marcus said, his voice betraying no emotion. Sarah began preparing the lidocaine injection, but as she turned back toward Marcus, she noticed something that made her pause. He was gripping the edge of the examination table with his good hand, his knuckles white with tension. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, and a thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. Mr. Rodriguez? Are you all right? Marcus blinked, seeming to come back from somewhere far away. Yeah, I'm fine. Just go ahead. But Sarah's instincts were screaming at her that this man was anything but fine. She had seen this before, the way trauma survivors sometimes dissociated when faced with medical procedures. The controlled exterior was a facade, carefully constructed to hide whatever was happening underneath. Marcus, she said softly, using his first name deliberately to try to ground him in the present moment. I need you to stay with me, okay? We're in San Diego General Hospital. It's Tuesday evening. You're safe. His eyes snapped to hers, and for just a moment, she saw something raw and vulnerable flash across his features before the mask slipped back into place. I know where I am, he said quietly. Sarah made a decision. Instead of proceeding immediately with the injection, she rolled her stool closer to the examination table. Before we start, can you tell me about these other scars? It might help me understand what we're dealing with here. Marcus's jaw tightened. Old injuries. Nothing relevant to tonight. Marcus, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've treated a lot of veterans, a lot of people who've been through difficult situations. Those scars tell a story, and if you're comfortable sharing some of that story, it might help me help you. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. The sound of the hospital's activity continued outside the closed door, footsteps in the hallway, muffled conversations, the distant sound of a monitor alarm. Finally, he spoke. I was deployed. Several times. Things happened. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. What branch? Navy. Special operations. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Navy SEALs were among the most elite military units, trained for the most dangerous missions. The scars, the hypervigilance, the emotional control, it all made sense. How long had you been back? 18 months. And tonight? What really happened to your arm? Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was having a nightmare. Woke up, and there was broken glass everywhere. Cut myself getting out of bed. The honesty in his admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was a man trained to be one of the world's most elite warriors, reduced to injuring himself while fighting battles that existed only in his sleep. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. That took courage. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. Courage. Right. I mean it. It takes strength to admit when we're struggling. Sarah prepared the lidocaine injection, but this time she moved more slowly, explaining each step as she went. I'm going to inject the anesthetic now. You'll feel a small pinch, and then the area will go numb. As the needle went in, Marcus closed his eyes tightly, his breathing becoming controlled and measured. Sarah recognized the technique, something taught to help people cope with stress and pain. You're doing great, she murmured, completing the injection. Just breathe through it. While they waited for the anesthetic to take effect, Sarah found herself studying Marcus's face. He couldn't be much older than 35, but there were lines around his eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. His dark hair was cut short in a style that suggested he hadn't completely let go of military regulations, and there was a small scar on his left temple that she hadn't noticed before. Where were you deployed? She asked, not expecting an answer, but offering the opportunity for him to talk if he wanted to. Afghanistan. 3 tours. One in Iraq. The words came out like a recitation, facts delivered without emotion. That's a lot. Part of the job. Sarah began cleaning the wound more thoroughly, using saline solution to flush out any debris. Marcus watched her work with the intense focus of someone accustomed to observing everything around them. "What did you do in the teams?" she asked. "Medic." This information hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. A Navy SEAL medic, someone trained not only in combat, but in trauma medicine, someone who would have been responsible for keeping his teammates alive in the worst possible circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now treating someone who had probably saved countless lives in situations far more challenging than anything she faced in her sterile emergency room. "You've probably seen wounds a lot worse than this," she said, starting to place the first suture. "Different when it's your own," Marcus replied. And for the first time since he'd walked into the hospital, there was something almost human in his voice. Sarah worked steadily, placing neat stitches along the length of the wound. Marcus remained perfectly still, though she noticed his breathing became more labored as she continued. When she was about halfway done, he spoke suddenly. "I used to be good at this." "At what?" "Saving people. Fixing them. I could patch up a teammate under fire, get them stable enough to make it to extraction. Did dozens of times." Sarah paused in her suturing. "You still are good at it. Look at how you bandaged this wound. Textbook application. It's not the same." "I can't." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Can't what?" "I can't save myself." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with more pain than Sarah had heard in years of treating patients. She finished the last few stitches in silence, giving Marcus time to compose himself. "There," she said finally, stepping back to examine her work. 12 stitches. Keep it dry for the first 48 hours, then you can shower normally. The stitches will dissolve on their own in about 10 days. Marcus looked down at his newly bandaged arm. "Thank you." "Marcus," Sarah said, removing her gloves and sitting back down on the stool. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no judgment here, okay?" He nodded, though his posture had become guarded again. "Are you getting help? For the nightmares, for what you've been through?" Marcus's laugh was harsh. "You mean therapy? Talking to someone about my feelings? I mean getting support for trauma that would break most people. What you've experienced, what you've seen, nobody should have to carry that alone." The VA tried. "Assign me a counselor." Young guy, probably never been in a fight in his life, asking me how it felt to watch my teammates die. Marcus's voice was bitter. "How do you think it felt?" Sarah felt her heart clench at the pain in his words. "There are other options. Other people who understand what you've been through." "Like who?" "There are support groups for veterans, therapists who specialize in combat trauma. People who get it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I try that too. Sat in a circle with other guys, everyone sharing their stories. But when it was my turn, he trailed off." "What happened?" "I couldn't talk. Couldn't get the words out. They all looked at me, waiting, and I just froze." Sarah reached over and gently touched his uninjured arm. "Sometimes the hardest part is just starting. What if I don't know how to start? What if I've forgotten how to be anything other than this?" The vulnerability in his question made Sarah's chest tighten. Here was a man who had been trained to be invincible, to push through anything, to never show weakness. But trauma didn't care about training or strength or military discipline. "You start by acknowledging that you deserve help," she said quietly. "You start by believing that the person you were before is still in there somewhere." Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression. For just a moment, the carefully constructed walls came down, and she glimpsed the man underneath the armor. "I don't remember who that person was," he whispered. "Then, maybe it's time to find out." Sarah stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a business card. "This is Dr. Patricia Williams. She's a psychiatrist who works specifically with combat veterans. She's helped a lot of people find their way back." Marcus took the card but didn't look at it. "Why do you care?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "Because I've seen what trauma does to people, and I've also seen what recovery looks like. You've spent years saving other people's lives. Maybe it's time to save your own." Marcus pocketed the card without comment, but Sarah noticed he didn't throw it away. "I need to discharge you with some care instructions," she said, returning to her professional demeanor. "Take ibuprofen for pain. I assume you want to avoid anything stronger?" Marcus nodded. Many combat veterans were wary of prescription pain medications, having seen too many comrades fall into the trap of addiction. "If you notice any signs of infection, increased redness, swelling, pus, red streaking, come back immediately." And Marcus? "Yeah. If you have another night like tonight, don't wait until you're bleeding to get help. Come to the ER if you need to. We're here." Marcus slid off the examination table, testing his range of motion with his injured arm. "I'll try to avoid any more glass." "That's not what I meant." He met her eyes again, and Sarah saw that he understood exactly what she meant. "Thank you," he said again, and this time the words carried more weight. After Marcus left, Sarah found herself unable to shake the encounter. She had treated thousands of patients over the years, but something about him had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was the contrast between his obvious competence and his profound vulnerability, or maybe it was the recognition that he was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people but completely alone. She thought about the scar she had cataloged on his arm and wondered about the ones she couldn't see, the invisible wounds that were clearly causing him the most pain. She had given him Dr. Williams' card, but she knew from experience that many veterans never made that first call. As she moved on to her next patient, Sarah found herself hoping that Marcus Rodriguez would prove her wrong. 3 weeks after his visit to the emergency room, Marcus sat in his pickup truck outside the Veterans Affairs building in downtown San Diego. The business card Dr. Chun had given him was worn from handling, the edges soft and slightly bent. He had pulled it out dozens of times, stared at the name Dr. Patricia Williams printed in neat black letters, and put it back in his wallet without making the call. The stitches in his arm had healed well, leaving only a thin pink line to join the collection of scars he carried. But the nightmares hadn't stopped. If anything, they had gotten worse. Last night he had woken up screaming, his sheets soaked with sweat, convinced he could still hear the sound of incoming mortars. His neighbors had probably heard him, though none of them would mention it. That was the unspoken rule in his apartment complex. Everyone minded their own business. Through the windshield, Marcus watched other veterans walking in and out of the building. Some moved with the same controlled precision he recognized in himself, while others seemed more relaxed, chatting with companions or checking their phones like normal people. He wondered what separated them. Why some people seemed to find their way back while others remained trapped in the past. A tap on his passenger window made him jump, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Through the glass, he saw a woman about his age with short auburn hair and kind eyes, gesturing for him to roll down the window. "You've been sitting here for 20 minutes, she said when he complied. "Either you're casing the joint for a robbery, or you're working up the courage to go inside." Marcus found himself almost smiling despite his anxiety. "What makes you think I'm not a criminal?" Criminals don't usually look like they're about to throw up from nerves. She extended her hand through the window. "I'm Beth Kovac, formerly Staff Sergeant Kovac, Army National Guard." "Marcus Rodriguez, Navy. Teams." Marcus nodded, surprised by how easily she had read him. "My brother was a SEAL," Beth explained. "Same look, same way of sitting like you're ready to bolt at any second." Her expression grew more serious. He sat in his car outside this building for 3 hours before his first appointment. Nearly drove away twice. Did it help? Beth's smile was genuine. "He's inside right now, actually. Group session. He's been coming for about 6 months. She paused, studying Marcus's face. "First appointment? I haven't actually made one yet. I have a name, but it feels impossible to make that first call." Marcus was struck by how perfectly she had articulated what he couldn't express. "Yeah. Want some company? I was heading in anyway. I volunteer with the peer support program." The offer of companionship was both terrifying and appealing. Marcus had spent so much time isolating himself that the idea of having someone walk beside him, even for a few minutes, felt both foreign and necessary. I don't want to impose, he said. You wouldn't be. Trust me. I know exactly what you're feeling right now. The parking lot courage is real. Marcus made a decision that surprised him. He turned off the engine and opened his door. Okay. They walked toward the building together, Beth maintaining a steady stream of casual conversation that helped keep Marcus's anxiety from spiraling. She told him about her deployment to Iraq, her work as a military police officer, and her transition to civilian life. Her tone was matter-of-fact, without the forced cheer that Marcus had encountered from well-meaning civilians who had no frame of reference for what military service actually entailed. The lobby of the VA building was busier than Marcus had expected. Veterans of all ages filled the seating areas, some in wheelchairs, others showing no visible signs of their service. The walls were covered with memorial plaques and photos from various conflicts, a visual reminder of the cost of the freedoms most Americans took for granted. The mental health office is on the third floor, Beth said, leading him toward the elevators. Dr. Williams is actually one of the good ones. She did 2 tours as a Navy psychiatrist before joining the VA. This information helped ease some of Marcus's apprehension. The idea of talking to someone who had at least some understanding of military culture was less daunting than facing another civilian therapist who might mean well, but couldn't truly comprehend his experiences. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless. Marcus found himself focusing on his breathing, using the techniques he had learned during his SEAL training to manage stress. Box breathing, 4 counts in, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. It was ironic how the same skills that had helped him stay calm in combat were now necessary just to walk into a therapist's office. The mental health department waiting area was quieter than the main lobby, with comfortable chairs arranged around low tables covered with magazines and informational pamphlets. A few other veterans sat scattered around the room, some reading, others staring into space with the 1,000-yard stare that Marcus recognized all too well. Beth approached the reception desk and spoke quietly with the woman behind the counter. Marcus couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw the receptionist nod and pick up a phone. Dr. Williams has about 10 minutes between appointments, Beth reported back. She can see you briefly to discuss setting up an initial consultation. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. This was happening faster than he had anticipated, and part of him wanted to turn around and leave. But another part of him, a small voice that sounded like Dr. Chun, reminded him that he deserved help. Mr. Rodriguez? Marcus turned to see a woman in her early 50s approaching them. She was tall and athletic, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that held both intelligence and compassion. She wore casual clothes rather than a formal suit, which somehow made her seem more approachable. I'm Dr. Williams. Beth told me you might be interested in discussing treatment options. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Would you like to step into my office for a few minutes? No commitment, just a conversation. Dr. Williams' office was nothing like what Marcus had expected. Instead of the sterile clinical environment he had imagined, the room was warm and inviting. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with professional texts, but also novels and memoirs. A large window looked out over a small garden, and the furniture was arranged to feel more like a living room than a medical office. Please, have a seat wherever you're comfortable, Dr. Williams said, closing the door behind them. Marcus chose a chair that put his back to the wall and gave him a clear view of the door. Dr. Williams noticed his positioning, but made no comment, settling into a chair across from him rather than behind her desk. Beth mentioned you're a Navy veteran, she said conversationally. What brought you in today? Marcus had rehearsed this moment in his head dozens of times, but now that it was here, the words seemed inadequate. I'm having some trouble sleeping. Nightmares. How long has that been going on? Since I got back. 18 months. Dr. Williams nodded. That's a long time to be dealing with that alone. What made you decide to seek help now? Marcus thought about Dr. Chin's gentle insistence, about the business card he had carried for weeks, about the broken glass and blood on his apartment floor. Someone at the hospital suggested I talk to someone. You were at the hospital? Marcus showed her his healed arm. Accident at home. But Dr. Williams was too experienced to miss the subtext. She had seen the same careful phrasing from hundreds of veterans who were struggling to admit the full extent of their problems. Marcus, can I call you Marcus? I want you to know that whatever brought you here today, you've taken a very brave step. A lot of people never make it this far. I don't feel brave. I feel. Marcus struggled to find the right words. Broken. The admission hung in the air between them. Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle but focused. Tell me about the nightmares. What do you see? For a moment, Marcus thought he couldn't do it. The memories were too raw, too painful to put into words. But something about Dr. Williams' steady presence and the safety of her office made him want to try. Different things. Sometimes it's the day we lost Tommy. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Sometimes it's the civilians we couldn't save. Sometimes it's worse. Who was Tommy? My swim buddy. We went through training together, deployed together 3 times. He was... Marcus stopped, his throat tightening. He was like my brother. What happened to him? Marcus closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in that dusty Afghan village, the sound of gunfire echoing off the buildings, the smell of smoke, and blood heavy in the air. ID, he said simply. We were supposed to extract some civilians from a compound that had been taken over by insurgents. Intelligence said it was lightly defended, quick in and out. But it was a trap. Dr. Williams waited patiently as Marcus gathered himself to continue. Tommy was point man that day. He always volunteered for point, said he had the best eyes for spotting trouble. The device was buried in the doorway of the building we were supposed to clear. When it went off, Marcus's voice broke. I was the medic. I was supposed to save him. But there was nothing left to save. How many men were in your unit that day? 12 went in. 8 came out. The stark numbers told their own story of violence and loss. Dr. Williams had heard similar accounts from dozens of patients, but each one carried its own unique weight of trauma and survivor guilt. You said you were the medic. Did you treat other wounded from your unit that day? Marcus nodded. Jake had shrapnel in his leg. Mike took a bullet through his shoulder. I got them stable, got them to extraction. His hands were trembling now. But I couldn't save Tommy. I couldn't save Rodriguez. No relation. We just had the same last name. I couldn't save Peterson. Marcus, listen to me. Dr. Williams' voice cut through his growing agitation. An IED that takes out the point man. There was nothing you could have done. You know that, right? Medics can't raise the dead. Then what good was I? What was the point of all that training, all those skills, if I couldn't save the people who mattered most? The question revealed the heart of Marcus's struggle. Like many combat medics, he had defined his worth by his ability to preserve life. When faced with losses that were beyond anyone's control, he had internalized those failures as personal shortcomings. How many people did you save during your deployments? Dr. Williams asked quietly. Marcus was taken aback by the question. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I asked. How many wounded did you treat successfully? How many people went home to their families because of your skills? Marcus had never thought to count the successes, only the failures. I don't know. Dozens, I guess. Maybe more. But those don't matter to you as much as the ones you lost. They should have all come home. Should they? According to who? The question challenged Marcus's fundamental assumption about his role and responsibilities. For the first time, he began to consider that maybe the standard he was holding himself to was impossible to achieve. Marcus, I want to try something with you, Dr. Williams said. It's called cognitive restructuring, and it helps people examine the thoughts and beliefs that are causing them distress. Marcus nodded, willing to try anything that might provide some relief from the constant mental anguish. When you think about Tommy's death, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? It's my fault. Okay, now I want you to examine that thought. What evidence do you have that it was your fault? I was supposed to protect him. I was supposed to keep everyone safe. Was that actually your job description? Was the team medic responsible for preventing IED attacks? Marcus frowned, beginning to see where she was going with this. No, that would be the explosive ordnance disposal guy, or intelligence. So the evidence that it was your fault is that you feel like it should have been your responsibility, even though it actually wasn't part of your assigned duties? The logic was undeniable, but Marcus's emotions rebelled against it. It feels like my fault. Feelings aren't facts, Marcus. Grief and trauma can make us feel responsible for things that were completely outside our control. Dr. Williams paused. If another medic had been in your position that day, and the same thing had happened, would you blame him for Tommy's death? No, of course not. Then, why is the standard different for you? Marcus couldn't answer that question, which was exactly Dr. Williams' point. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with her gently challenging the distorted thinking patterns that had kept Marcus trapped in a cycle of self-blame and despair. When their time was up, Dr. Williams walked him back to the waiting area where Beth was reading a magazine. "I'd like to see you again," she told Marcus. "Would you be willing to commit to a few sessions? We can work on some techniques for managing the nightmares and start addressing some of these thought patterns we discussed." Marcus looked at Beth, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Okay," he said. How about next week, same time? And, Marcus, if you have a really bad night between now and then, I want you to call the crisis line. Promise me." Marcus took the card she offered with the crisis number and his appointment information. "I promise." As they walked back to the parking lot, Beth was quiet, allowing Marcus to process what had just happened. "How do you feel?" she finally asked when they reached his truck. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Scared," he admitted, "but maybe a little hopeful, too. That's exactly how my brother felt after his first session. The hope is the important part. It means you're still in there somewhere." Marcus thought about Dr. Chen's words from weeks earlier about finding the person he used to be. Maybe she had been right. Maybe that person was still there, buried under layers of trauma and grief, but not lost forever. "Beth," he said as she turned to leave. "Thank you for today, for getting me through the door. That's what we do for each other," she replied simply. "See you next week?" Marcus nodded, realizing that for the first time in 18 months, he was actually looking forward to something. Dr. Sarah Chun hadn't expected to see Marcus Rodriguez again, at least not as a patient. When she spotted him in the hospital cafeteria 6 weeks after his emergency room visit, she almost didn't recognize him. He was sitting alone at a corner table, picking at a sandwich while reading something on his phone. The change was subtle, but noticeable. His shoulders weren't as rigid, and he seemed more present, less like he was constantly scanning for threats. Sarah grabbed a coffee and approached his table. "Marcus? I'm Dr. Chun, from the ER a few weeks ago." Marcus looked up, and Sarah was struck by the difference in his eyes. They were still guarded, but there was something lighter there, a spark that hadn't been present during their first meeting. "Dr. Chun, hi." Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit down. I don't want to interrupt your lunch." "You're not interrupting anything important. Just reading news articles about the VA funding debates." Marcus closed his phone and set it aside. "Actually, I was hoping I might run into you again." "Really? How's the arm healing?" Marcus rolled up his sleeve, showing her the barely visible scar. "Perfect. You do good work." "Thank you. You look—" Sarah paused, searching for the right words. "You look better. More settled, I guess." Marcus nodded slowly. "I took your advice. Called Dr. Williams, started therapy. It's been challenging but helpful. I'm so glad to hear that. How's it going?" Marcus considered the question while taking a sip of his water. 6 weeks of therapy had given him vocabulary for experiences he had never been able to articulate before, but he still struggled with discussing his progress out loud. "Some days are better than others," he said finally. "The nightmares haven't stopped completely, but they're less frequent. And when I do have them, I have tools now for getting back to sleep." "That's wonderful progress. Dr. Williams taught me this thing called grounding. When I start to get pulled back into a flashback, I focus on what's real right now, what I can see, hear, touch. It sounds simple, but it works." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the simplest techniques are the most effective." "Are you doing individual therapy or group sessions?" "Both, actually. I was terrified of the group at first. Bunch of guys sitting around talking about feelings." Marcus's expression was self-deprecating. "But It turns out talking about feelings isn't the worst thing in the world. What changed your mind? I met this Marine named Danny. Lost both his legs to an IED in Fallujah. First group session I attended. I'm sitting there thinking I don't belong, that my problems aren't real compared to someone who's dealing with that level of physical trauma. Then Danny looks at me and says, "Just because you can't see my worst wounds doesn't mean they're not there." Turns out he was dealing with the same nightmares, the same guilt, the same feeling that he should have been able to save everybody. Marcus paused, remembering that moment of recognition, the relief of finding people who truly understood what he was carrying. "It was the first time since I got back that I didn't feel completely alone," he continued. "These guys that get it, they know what it's like to come home to a world that seems normal on the surface, but feels completely foreign when you're trying to live in it." "How many people are in your group?" 8, usually. "We lost one guy last month. Not to suicide," Marcus added quickly, seeing the concern flash across Sarah's face. "He got a job offer in another state, but it was hard to see him go. We've all gotten close." Sarah was struck by the difference in Marcus's demeanor when talking about his support group. The isolation that had been so apparent during their first meeting had been replaced by genuine connection to other people. "Tell me about the others," she said. Marcus's face brightened slightly. "There's Danny, the Marine I mentioned. Then there's Alex, who is Army infantry, 3 tours in Afghanistan. He's probably the funniest person I've ever met, which is weird because he's been through some of the worst stuff any of us have seen. There's James, who is a helicopter pilot. Sarah, Army medic like me, but different branch. Her story is it's rough. She was the only woman on a lot of missions, dealt with harassment from her own unit on top of everything else." Marcus continued describing his group members, and Sarah noticed how his voice changed when he talked about them. There was affection there and protective concern, the same tone someone might use when talking about family members. "It sounds like you found your tribe," she observed. "Yeah, I guess we have. Dr. Williams says that's one of the most important parts of recovery. Finding people who understand your experience without needing explanations. And how are you handling civilian life? Work, daily routines." Marcus's expression became more complicated. "That's harder. I'm still doing construction, but it doesn't feel meaningful, you know? I spend my days building houses for people I'll never meet, fixing things that don't really matter. After years of work that was literally life or death, everything else feels pointless. Have you thought about what kind of work might feel meaningful to you?" "Actually, yeah, Dr. Williams, and I've been talking about that. There's a program that trains former combat medics to work as paramedics or emergency medical technicians. The transition is easier because a lot of the skills carry over, but you're still helping people in crisis situations." Sarah felt a surge of excitement at this development. "That sounds perfect for you. Have you looked into it? I'm supposed to meet with a recruiter next week. The program is competitive, but my military experience should help." Marcus hesitated. "The thing is, I'm scared I'm not ready yet. What if I freeze up during a call? What if I can't handle seeing people in medical distress without it triggering flashbacks?" Those are valid concerns, but they're also the kind of challenges you can work through with your support system. How do you think your group would respond if you shared those fears with them? Marcus smiled for the first time since Sarah had sat down. "They'd probably tell me to stop overthinking it and just apply. Danny especially has no patience for what he calls analysis paralysis. Smart man. And what does Dr. Williams think? She thinks I should go for it. Says the fact that I'm worried about my readiness is actually a good sign. It means I'm taking it seriously and thinking about how to handle potential challenges." Their conversation was interrupted when Sarah's pager buzzed. She glanced at it and sighed. "Emergency. I need to get back to the ER." "Of course. Thank you for taking the time to talk." Sarah stood, then hesitated. "Marcus, I want you to know how proud I am of you. I know we barely knew each other that night in the ER, but seeing you now, you've done incredible work to get to this point." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I had a lot of help. That night, when you gave me Dr. Williams' card, I almost threw it away a dozen times. But something you said stuck with me." "What was that?" "You said I deserve help. Nobody had ever said that to me before. Not in those words. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. You did deserve help. You still do. After Sarah left, Marcus sat alone in the cafeteria for a while, thinking about their conversation. 6 weeks ago, the idea of discussing his therapy progress with relative ease would have been unimaginable. The work he was doing with Dr. Williams was slowly teaching him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that asking for help was actually a form of strength. That evening, Marcus arrived at the group therapy session in the familiar conference room on the third floor of the VA building. The other members were already gathered around the circular arrangement of chairs that had become as comfortable to him as his own living room. Rodriguez, Danny called out as Marcus entered. Just in time. James was about to tell us about his disaster of a date last night. It wasn't a disaster, James protested, though his red face suggested otherwise. We just had different expectations for what constitutes appropriate first date conversation. Let me guess, said Alex, grinning. You told her about the time you crashed a helicopter in the desert. It was a controlled landing, not a crash, James corrected. And it seemed relevant because she mentioned she was scared of flying. The group erupted in good-natured laughter. This kind of easy camaraderie had taken weeks to develop, but now it felt natural. They could joke about their experiences because they shared them, could find humor in their struggles because they weren't struggling alone. Dr. Williams entered the room a few minutes later, carrying her usual notepad and coffee cup. Good evening, everyone. I can hear you from down the hall, which means either James shared another dating story or someone won the lottery. James tried to comfort a woman's fear of flying by describing aircraft maintenance failures. Sarah, the Army medic, explained with a straight face. Ah, that explains the volume level. Dr. Williams settled into her chair. Before we dive into James's romantic adventures, Marcus, how did your meeting with the paramedic program recruiter go? All eyes turned to Marcus. A month ago, being the center of attention would have made him want to disappear. Now it just felt like family checking in on something important. Actually, I haven't met with them yet. That's next week, Marcus clarified. But I did have an interesting conversation today with a doctor who treated me the night I got stitches. The one who gave you Dr. Williams' card? Danny asked. Yeah, she said I looked better, more settled. Asked about therapy and recovery. Marcus paused. It was weird talking to someone from outside the group about this stuff. But good weird. How so? Dr. Williams prompted. I realized I could talk about therapy without feeling ashamed. Like, I was actually proud to tell her I was getting help. Marcus looked around the circle. 6 weeks ago, I would have lied if someone asked about counseling. What changed? Asked Alex. Marcus thought about the question seriously. You guys, I think. And Dr. Williams. And realizing that the strongest people I know are the ones who ask for help when they need it. Sarah nodded emphatically. I used to think admitting I had problems made me weak. Turns out it was the opposite. Staying silent and pretending to be fine was the coward's way out. Speaking of which, Dr. Williams interjected. How was everyone's week with the homework assignment? The previous week, she had asked each group member to identify one person in their life they could be completely honest with about their struggles, someone outside the therapy group who could serve as additional support. I called my sister, Danny reported. Told her about the phantom pain and the nightmares. She cried, which made me cry, which was awkward, but probably necessary. How did it feel to open up to her? Dr. Williams asked. Terrifying at first, but she said she'd been waiting 3 years for me to trust her enough to tell her what was really going on. Made me realize I'd been protecting her from nothing. She already knew I was struggling. Other group members shared similar experiences. Alex had talked to his father, James to his roommate from college. Each story involved initial fear followed by relief and stronger connection. Marcus, Dr. Williams prompted. Did you reach out to anyone this week? Marcus hesitated. Not exactly someone new, but I did call my mom and actually told her about therapy instead of making up some excuse for why I couldn't visit last weekend. How did she respond? She was relieved. Apparently, she and my dad have been worried about me since I got back, but didn't know how to bring it up. She said she was proud of me for getting help. That must have felt good. Yeah, it did. And It made me realize how much energy I've been spending on hiding my problems from people who already cared about me. Dr. Williams nodded. That's a common pattern. We think we're protecting others by not burdening them with our struggles, but often we're just denying them the opportunity to support us. The session continued with discussions about triggers, coping strategies, and plans for the week ahead. As it wound down, Danny brought up something that had been on several group members' minds. Doc, I've been thinking about what we talked about last week about giving back and finding purpose in recovery. A few of us have been talking, and we want to do something for other vets who are just starting this process. Dr. Williams looked interested. What did you have in mind? A peer support program. Pair up new guys with someone who's been in therapy for a while. Not formal counseling, just someone to call when you're sitting in your car outside, the building working up courage to come inside. Marcus felt a jolt of recognition. Like Beth did for me. Exactly. We've all been where these new guys are. Isolated, scared, convinced we're broken beyond repair. Maybe we can help them see that recovery is possible. Dr. Williams smiled. I think that's an excellent idea. The research shows that peer support can be incredibly effective, especially for veterans. How would you want to structure it? The group spent the rest of the session brainstorming their peer support program. They would meet with newly referred veterans, share their stories, offer to accompany them to first appointments, and be available for crisis calls. Each current group member would be paired with incoming veterans based on similar experiences or military backgrounds. As the session ended and group members began gathering their belongings, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in almost 2 years: excitement about the future. Not just his own future, but the possibility of helping others find the same hope and healing he was discovering. Walking to his truck, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the paramedic training program. Before he could second-guess himself, he called and left a voicemail expressing his interest and requesting an interview. As he drove home, Marcus thought about the conversation with Dr. Chen earlier that day. She had said he looked more settled, and she was right. For the first time since returning from deployment, Marcus felt like he was building something rather than just surviving. The work with Dr. Williams was giving him tools to manage his trauma. The group was providing connection and understanding, and now the possibility of meaningful work was offering hope for the future. The nightmares would probably never disappear completely, and there would always be difficult days. But Marcus was beginning to understand that healing wasn't about becoming the person he was before deployment. It was about becoming someone new, someone who could carry his experiences without being crushed by them. That night, for the first time in months, Marcus fell asleep without dreading what his dreams might bring. 8 months after that first terrifying night in the emergency room, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the bay of Station 19, San Diego Fire Department, running his hands over the medical equipment in the back of the ambulance. The familiar weight of trauma shears in his pocket, the organized chaos of medical supplies, the smell of antiseptic, it all felt like coming home. His paramedic training had been intense, but rewarding. The skills came back faster than he had expected, muscle memory from his Navy medic days combining with new civilian protocols and procedures. But more importantly, he had discovered that the nightmares that had once made sleep impossible now served a different purpose. The same hypervigilance that had kept him awake at night made him an exceptional emergency responder during the day. Rodriguez, you ready for this? Called his partner, Janet Martinez, a 15-year veteran of the department who had been assigned to help break him in. She was tough, competent, and had immediately recognized Marcus's military background without needing to ask about it. As ready as anyone can be for their first official shift, Marcus replied, adjusting his radio and checking his gear one final time. First calls are always the hardest. After that, it's just adrenaline and training. Before Marcus could respond, the station's alarm system activated, filling the bay with its urgent wail. Rescue 19, Medic 19, respond to a traffic collision with injuries, Highway 5, southbound at Genesee Avenue. Marcus felt his heartbeat accelerate, but it was anticipation rather than panic. This was what he had trained for, what he had been working toward through all those months of therapy and healing. They were on the road within 90 seconds, Janet driving while Marcus reviewed the limited information they had about the call. Multi-vehicle accident, at least 2 injured, 1 person reportedly trapped in their vehicle. Standard stuff for a busy Friday afternoon in San Diego, but Marcus's first real test as a paramedic. "You okay over there?" Janet asked, glancing at him while navigating through traffic. "Yeah, I'm good. Just running through protocols." "Good man. Remember, we take care of ourselves first, then our partner, then the patients. In that order, always." The accident scene was controlled chaos when they arrived. Police had already blocked off lanes of traffic. The fire department was working on extracting a woman from a crushed sedan, and multiple patients were scattered across the roadway. Marcus grabbed his gear and followed Janet toward the incident command post, where a fire captain was coordinating the response. "What do we have, Cap?" Janet asked. "For vehicles involved, 5 patients. We've got 1 critical trapped in the sedan. That's your priority. 3 walking wounded with minor injuries, and 1 unconscious male who was thrown from a motorcycle." Marcus's training took over. He assessed the scene quickly, noted the positioning of emergency vehicles and potential hazards, then focused on the critical patient. The woman in the sedan was conscious but in obvious distress, her left leg pinned under the dashboard. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus with the paramedics. We're going to take good care of you," he said, kneeling beside the open driver's door. "Can you tell me your name?" "Lisa." "Lisa Chun," the woman gasped. "My leg. I can't feel my leg." Marcus began his assessment while Janet prepared for equipment. Patient was alert and oriented, breathing was adequate but shallow, blood pressure was dropping, signs of shock, likely from internal bleeding. The familiar rhythm of emergency medicine felt natural, his hands steady and sure as he worked. "Lisa, we're going to get you some pain medication and start in 4, then get you out of here. The firefighters are almost done cutting away the metal." As Marcus worked, he found himself thinking about Dr. Sarah Chun, the emergency physician who had first encouraged him to seek help. Different Chun, but the coincidence felt significant somehow. He wondered if she would be working when they brought Lisa to the hospital. The extraction took 20 minutes, during which Marcus maintained Lisa's vitals and kept her calm while the rescue team carefully freed her leg. When they finally lifted her onto the stretcher, her condition was stable but still serious. "Good work, Rodriguez," Janet said as they loaded Lisa into the ambulance. Textbook assessment and treatment. The transport to the hospital was routine, Marcus monitoring Lisa's condition while Janet drove with lights and sirens through afternoon traffic. By the time they arrived at San Diego General's emergency department, Marcus felt like he had been doing this job for years rather than hours. Dr. Sarah Chun was indeed working that afternoon, and her face lit up with recognition when she saw Marcus wheeling Lisa through the trauma bay doors. "Rodriguez, I heard you made it through paramedic training. How was your first call?" "Multi-vehicle accident with entrapment," Marcus reported, shifting seamlessly into professional mode. Lisa Chun, approximately 30 years old, pinned in vehicle for 20 minutes. Probable internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping, but stable on transport. For established, pain medication administered. Sarah took the handoff with the same competence Marcus remembered from their first meeting. As her team took over Lisa's care, she pulled Marcus aside. "You look like you were born for this job," she said. "How does it feel?" Marcus considered the question. "Like I remember who I'm supposed to be." "That's the best answer I could have hoped for." Sarah paused. "I assume you know your patient shares my last name?" "I noticed. Any relation?" "My cousin, actually. She was on her way to visit her kids when the accident happened." Sarah's voice was tight with worry. Marcus felt a chill. In all the chaos of the call, he hadn't thought about the personal connections behind the medical emergency. Lisa wasn't just a patient. She was someone's daughter, mother, cousin. "She's going to be okay," Marcus said with conviction. "We got her here quickly. She was stable throughout transport. Dr. Williams, my therapist, she always says that sometimes the most meaningful work happens in the ordinary moments we don't expect." Sarah smiled despite her worry. Dr. Williams is a wise woman. Thank you for taking such good care of Lisa. As Marcus and Janet prepared to return to service, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange interconnectedness of life. A random traffic accident had brought him face to face with the cousin of the doctor who had first set him on the path to recovery. It felt like a sign that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Their second call of the shift was less dramatic. An elderly man with chest pain who turned out to be having an anxiety attack rather than a heart attack. The third was a construction worker with a badly cut hand, eerily similar to Marcus's own presentation at the hospital months earlier. By the end of their 12-hour shift, Marcus and Janet had responded to 7 calls ranging from minor injuries to life-threatening emergencies. Marcus felt exhausted, but satisfied in a way he hadn't experienced since his military service. Not bad for a rookie, Janet said as they cleaned and restocked their ambulance. You've got good instincts. Thanks. I had good training, both military and civilian. You know, there's something different about military medics. You guys have this calm and chaos that you can't really teach. It's like you've already seen the worst things that can happen, so nothing really rattles you. Marcus thought about Janet's observation as he drove home that evening. In some ways, she was right. His combat experience had given him a tolerance for high-stress situations that served him well in civilian emergency medicine. But it was more than that. The work he had done in therapy, the connections he had built with his support group, the gradual process of healing, all of that had transformed his military experience from a source of trauma into a source of strength. Instead of going straight home, Marcus stopped at the VA building. Thursday nights were group therapy sessions, and even though his schedule as a paramedic would sometimes conflict with the regular meeting times, he made sure to attend whenever possible. The familiar conference room felt even more like home now that Marcus was building a new life outside of it. The group had evolved over the months, with some members graduating to less frequent sessions while new veterans joined the circle. But the core group remained: Danny, Alex, James, Sarah, and Marcus, along with Dr. Williams facilitating. How was the first day on the job? Danny asked as soon as Marcus walked in. Good. Really good, actually. We transported Sarah's cousin to the hospital after a car accident. Dr. Chun, Alex asked, the one who gave you Williams' card? Yeah. Small world, right? Dr. Williams smiled. Sometimes the universe has a sense of timing about these things. How did it feel being back in that environment? Familiar but different. In the military, we were usually treating trauma from violence, gunshot wounds, blast injuries, things that people did to each other. Today it was just accidents, people having medical emergencies. The skills are the same, but the context is cleaner somehow. Cleaner how? Marcus struggled to articulate the difference. In combat, there was always this underlying anger. We'd treat enemy casualties too, and it was hard not to think about the fact that these people had been trying to kill us 20 minutes earlier. Today, every patient was just someone who needed help. That's a significant distinction, Dr. Williams observed. How do you think your combat experience will help you in this job? The medical skills, obviously, but also the ability to stay calm under pressure, to make decisions quickly when there's not enough information. Marcus paused, and I think understanding trauma from the inside might make me better at helping people through the worst moments of their lives. Sarah, the Army medic, nodded emphatically. I've been thinking about applying for nursing school for the same reason. We know what it's like to be scared and hurt, so maybe we can be better at helping others through it. The conversation turned to updates from other group members. Alex had started dating someone seriously for the first time since his return from deployment. James had been promoted at his civilian job. Danny was planning to compete in a wheelchair racing event. I want to bring something up that I've been thinking about, Marcus said toward the end of the session. The peer support program we started, it's been really successful. We've helped 12 new veterans get connected to services in the past 4 months. That's wonderful, Dr. Williams said. What's on your mind about it? I think we should expand it. Not just to new therapy patients, but to veterans who are having crisis moments. Like the nights when you're sitting alone in your apartment thinking about ending it all. The room was quiet for a moment. Everyone there had experienced those nights. the dark hours when death seemed preferable to another day of carrying invisible wounds. What would that look like? Danny asked. A crisis phone line staffed by volunteers from groups like ours. People who've been through the worst of it and come out the other side. Sometimes you just need to talk to someone who understands what you're going through. Dr. Williams looked intrigued. That's actually a brilliant idea. Research shows that peer support during crisis situations can be incredibly effective. Have you thought about how to implement something like that? I've been doing some research. There are models in other cities we could adapt. It would take training, oversight, probably partnership with the VA or other organizations. I'm in, Sarah said immediately. Whatever it takes to set that up, count me in. The others voiced similar enthusiasm. By the end of the session, they had outlined a basic plan for expanding their peer support efforts to include crisis intervention. As the group members said their goodbyes and began to leave, Dr. Williams pulled Marcus aside. I want you to know how proud I am of your progress. When you first came in here, you were convinced you were broken beyond repair. Now you're saving lives professionally and volunteering to help other veterans in crisis. I had a lot of help, Marcus replied. This group, you, Dr. Chun, that first night. I couldn't have done any of this alone. That's true, but you had to be willing to accept that help. And you had to do the hard work of facing your trauma and learning to carry it differently. Marcus thought about Dr. Williams' words as he drove home. The nightmares still came sometimes, though less frequently and with less intensity. He still had difficult days when the weight of what he had seen and experienced felt overwhelming. But he also had tools now for managing those moments, people who understood what he was going through, and work that gave his life meaning. His apartment, which had once felt like a prison, now felt like a sanctuary. He had decorated it with photos from group events, certificates from his paramedic training, and mementos from his military service that no longer filled him with pain, but with pride for his service and sorrow for what was lost. Before bed, Marcus checked his phone and found a text message from an unknown number. This is Lisa Chun. Dr. Chun gave me your number. I wanted to thank you for taking such good care of me today. I know you probably do this all the time, but it meant everything to my family. Marcus smiled and typed back, just doing my job. Glad you're okay. As he settled into bed, Marcus reflected on the day. 8 months ago, he had been so lost in trauma and despair that he had injured himself during a nightmare. Tonight, he was a paramedic who had helped save someone's life, a peer counselor planning to expand crisis support for other veterans, and a person who had learned to transform his wounds into wisdom. The room was quiet now, but it was the peaceful quiet of healing rather than the desolate silence of isolation. Marcus closed his eyes and, for once, welcomed whatever dreams might come. He had learned that even the difficult ones were just part of his story now, not the end of it. In the darkness, his last conscious thought was of tomorrow's shift and the lives he might help save, the small but meaningful difference he could make in a world that had once seemed too broken to repair. He had found his way back from the worst kind of darkness, and now he could help light the way for others making that same difficult journey home.